Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrey Shental. I'm the curator of the discussion program of Moscow Biennale for Young Art. And firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to the Biennale, to Winzavod, and to the Italian Cultural Institute who made this event tonight possible. And I'm glad to see all the guests who are going to give their presentations tonight. But firstly, I would say like a couple of words about the program in general. So we have already 3 discussions. Before it was about senior age, negativity and negative emotions, and failure and dispossession. So as you can see, our program is dedicated to this kind of negative or excluded categories that are not that much elucidated and discussed in the context of contemporary art. And tonight, our subject is more broad. It's about communication and maybe miscommunication, social awkwardness, and impossibility to communicate. And I would like to introduce Paulina Kolaseridi, who would be our moderator for tonight. She is a social researcher focusing on the internet. Her key research interests are concentrated around issues of how do we know, feel, anticipate, and imagine technologies. She is from Tomsk, Siberia, and now mostly based in Moscow. Paulina coordinates a grassroots community of researchers, academic and independent ones, called Club for Internet and Society Enthusiasts. She also teaches at universities and acts as a knowledge activist. So please, Paulina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful and very glad to moderate this discussion, and I'm so glad that we have tonight an opportunity to participate in a conversation of people from different intellectual and practical backgrounds that I suppose might be quite important for the discussion about communication, because here we'll also see communication as a problem itself, as what we'll do here is to communicate about communication. So, like, you know, such a figure about a figure, and I suppose we'll also be able to problematize it in the discussion part. But now I will tell you some words about what will be going on here. So. After I finish this descriptive part, our 3 participants will have their, let's say, solo parts that will last about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll switch to the discussion. So I will tell you a bit about our participants, and we'll start probably, as Andrei had described the frame of our conversation, and then it will be, I suppose, important to trace how this frame might, you know, suit or become even broken during our participants' talk. So I will start. Who is here is Franco Berardi, who's a professor in Accademia di Brera in Milano. He's a philosopher and Marxist, an autonomous theory actor and also activist. He focuses on media and information technology and post-capitalism. Probably some of you have read his books and essays and other texts. Then the next participant is Oksana Maros, who is a cultural researcher. She teaches and works in a media department in High School of Economics and also in Free University. And also, Oksana has a blog of bad as cultural researcher, and in English it sounds not as cheery as in Russian. She is a researcher of online communication, digital memory, and death. And Egor Rogalev, who is an artist from St. Petersburg. Egor graduated from St. Petersburg University, and now he's an artist, so he combines architectural photography and street portraits performances, and studies how people in different post-Soviet countries participate in transformation of social worlds. Had several he participated in several exhibitions in Russia, Ukraine, Italy, and France. And probably each of you can, of course, say about yourself and introduce yourself how it might be more comfortable. And so we start with Franco before Berardi, so you are supposed to tell about pandemic threshold in the subjectivation, and I'm glad to pass you that microphone, virtual microphone, however.
Thank you, Paulina, and thanks everybody. Yes, I want to say something about a subject that is almost obvious nowadays, but I hope my approach will not be so obvious as the subject itself. I want to speak about the process of subjectivation in the present threshold. I use the word threshold because I think that the pandemics and the social management of the pandemics, particularly the lockdown and so on, social distancing and so on, is creating a situation that we can compare to a trauma. It's a trauma from the psychological point of view. But this trauma is a slow motion trauma that is not clearly showing a direction. We don't know exactly what is going to happen at the psychological level, first of all, at the economic level, at the social, at the geopolitical level. So we know that the pandemic is a major breakdown in the history of late modernity, that we know, but we cannot really predict the long lasting effects of this mutation. So I say we are in a threshold. The threshold is a place of passage from light to darkness, maybe, or sometimes from darkness to light. So we cannot exactly say if the effects will be, in a sense, oppressive and destructive for the social fabric, or the contrary. What we can do is to try to appreciate at the sociological, psychological, anthropological level the symptoms, the signs of a slow transformation, more than so, a slow mutation that is underway in this period. First of all, I want to say that the breakdown that the virus has brought about during this year is not really creating a totally new scenario. It's not new what we experience during the breakdown. It's not new the sense of disease that we are feeling more and more in the present a form of communication. It's not new, especially the social effects of the neoliberal acceleration. 30 years and more of neoliberal acceleration have destroyed, have jeopardized the fabric of social relation, have enormously accelerated the rhythm of daily life and the rhythm of competitive work. We have been more and more suffering for precarization, competition, desolidarization. In a sense, we have been feeling more and more that the social relation, the affective relation itself, have been stressed by the neoliberal aggression. More than so, the interconnection between neoliberal competition, precarization of labor, and the digital transformation of human communication has broken the affective perception of our present and of our future. From this point of view, we cannot say that the pandemic is creating something new. Rather, the pandemic is enormously accelerating a trend or many trends that were already inscribed in the reality of the last decades. Just to name an evident thing, let's think to our use of the digital devices for communication. Zoom has invaded our lives, and we are more and more perceiving that almost all of our affective, intellectual interaction is absorbed by the digital medium. This is not only a technological problem. This is not only a communicational problem. This is affecting directly the quality of the affective, and I would say of the erotic quality of social life. I think that the main transformation that has affected our lives in the last 10 years is a shift from a conjunctive form of human relation to a connective form. What is conjunction? What is connection? Conjunction implies a sort of ambiguous, uncertain, undetermined form of semiotic exchange when we communicate in the space of the physical world, when our bodies are present in the physical space, we exchange signs that are accompanied by conjunctive signs of detection, the perception of ambiguity, of irony, the physical, the erotic implication of the relation of our bodies in the space, the non-verbal communication. All these is enormously reduced, annihilated by the connectivization of our exchanges. We are more and more obliged to exchange signs in a space which is a preformatted space of communication. Is this relevant from the point of view of the present mutation? I think it is enormously relevant. The Ministry of Health of Canada, of the Canadian Republic, said at the beginning of the month of September, skip kisses. And in the case of having sex, do not forget to wear a sanitary mask. I read those words with a certain, with a certain fear, with a certain embarrassment, although I am too old for perceiving the full impact of this order that comes from a sanitary authority. I do not deny that probably the Ministry of Health of Canada is right. I accept the suggestions. I know I am not a negationist, as they say. I'm not a fascio libertarian. I do not deny the reality of the pandemics. I do not deny the danger for the lives and for the health of so many people. Say that my point is not a sanitary point. I want, from an anthropological point of view and from a psychological point of view, I want to ponder what kind of long-lasting effects this kind of trauma is going to produce in the coming times, during and after the pandemic itself. And when I pondered that, I must say that we are entering a very, very dangerous ground, because the first effect that the measures of containment, the unavoidable, the necessary measures of containment are, in my opinion, an effect of phobic sensibilization to the skin, to the body, to the lips of the other persons. Phobic sensibilization, you know what I mean. Sensibilization means a sort of concentration of attention, extreme attention, but this attention that we are obliged to pay to the body of the other, our desire, our attraction towards the body of the other is phobically marked. More and more, we are led to think, to perceive, to feel that the body of the other is something dangerous. I remember, I am old enough to remember what happened in the 80s when the acquired immunity syndrome, the AIDS epidemics spread all over the world. You know, that pandemics, that affection was comparatively much less relevant because it was affecting only the exchange of blood, not the exchange of saliva, not the exchange of kisses, not the exchange of air. Nevertheless, AIDS. I was living in New York City that period, and I was living in the village, in a place where drugs, pleasure, sex, art, where, I mean, we were in a period of full expression of our erotic and artistic possibilities. All of a sudden, the world changed, and changed for the bad, and changed for the worse. And this was a very marginal problem. So what's going to happen now? I have taken part in the last 6 or 7 months during the lockdown. I have been taking part to a Zoom seminar of psychiatrists, essentially, of psychoanalysts, many of them, who work in mental health clinics, hospitals, and so on. Essentially Latin people, Latin American, Argentinians, Brazilians, Spanish, French, Italians. And this experience has been enormously important for me because I have had the possibility of understanding firsthand from people who are in on the first line of the pandemics. I have had the possibility of understanding that something is happening in the depth of the erotic perception of life. Suicide has quadrupled in Italy, for instance. Panic crisis is spreading almost everywhere in the Latin world, and we can expect in the next future a sort of epidemics of depression caused, first of all, by this awkward effect of diserotization or of phobic sensibilization to life, and to the body of the other. This is my main subject at the present. And I think that this is not something that we can consider as a purely sanitary problem. It is much more than a sanitary problem. It's, in my opinion, the first political, social, and I would say also mainly aesthetic problem of the future. I don't think that the politicians will be able to deal with this problem. Absolutely not. I don't think that this is a problem for politicians or for economists and so on. This is the problem for psychoanalysts and artists. Artists are called essentially to reimagine eros, to reimagine pleasure, to reimagine desire from the point of view of this kind of depressive transformation that we are living nowadays. I thank you very much for your attention. And well, I have tried to outline a subject that is enormously complicated for many points of view, but I hope I just gave you the picture, the dimension of the problem I've been talking about. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Franco. I'm very glad you have introduced probably all the themes we are going to discuss further about the trauma and about different means of conjunction and connection, as well as their artistic approach towards what is this trauma and how to deal with it, about what is it, is it and how we might and what we might reimagine. And I hope that also Egor as an artist will also introduce his point here. But just before, I would like to ask Oksana to speak about the digital communication here and her point of view as a cultural researcher. Oksana, please.
Thank you, Paulina. I'm so glad to have my speech, and I believe that it will be something like a manifesto, and it seems to me that it's quite appropriate for today's conversation, and I will base my assumptions only on my own experience. So I will speak a little from a particularistic position, and sorry for that, because there might be not enough generalizations. So my speech will have several points, and point number one is that it seems to me that the very conversation about communication today is a conversation about those social pacts which form understandable social world. So communication allows us to distribute knowledge and ignorance, to interpret some events and to create a social system. And I would add that in the context of the new biopolitics, thanks to coronavirus and new social norms of physical distancing and social deprivation, online communication is one of the few things that allows the feeling of being in common, or at least being with others, to persist. So here I'm start arguing with Franco. And therefore, it seems important to me to observe which former communicative practices the society, or maybe some communities, begins to doubt, and which ones begin to validate. The second point here is that I suppose that there is at least one social agreement on a common bifurcation point, is the agreement that COVID or coronavirus is a crisis point due to which old communication norms have to or might be revised. And I see the evidence of this social pact not only in the existence of some official recommendations or authority decisions on the lockdowns, for instance. The proof lies in the language itself, where new words appear. There are new words that can register the transformation of everyday life. And sometimes these words can be not so new. They can be in use earlier, but rather as some rare neologisms. And suddenly these words also become relevant. I would point that Fiona Macpherson, she is the senior editor of the Oxford English Dictionary, says that we have nowadays the nuancing process of already existing words. And this process can metaphorically demonstrate the floundering between the old and the new order of representation. It process looks like this. I do not want to declare the emergency situation when everything old, for example, old habits, is cancelled. So I will look in my experience, in my common sense, in my conventional vocabulary for some words that can be used today. This is how the normalization, I'm sorry for this interruption. This is how the normalization of the catastrophe, of the crisis point occurs. As an example, I will settle on some neutral, very far from hate speech, new or seemingly new words. We know the word quarantine. The quarantine means a strong or not so strong alcoholic beverage that is made when people are locked up or trapped in some location for the extended period of time, and this word is not so new. It was used before coronavirus. We know Corona Coaster is the word that is about the ups and downs of the life due to the COVID. And we know the word maskne. It's also a new word. It's a combination of mask and acne, and it is about the skin breakouts that people can get from frequently wearing a mask. Yeah. And of course, we know Zoom bombing, and I'm sure we won't witness it today. In Russian, there are also that kind of words. For example, there is a beautiful word "karantikuly." Karantikuly is also a neologism, a combination of the words quarantine, and canicule, vacation. So the third point is something like that. Language allows us to fixate the collision of new and old practices of representation and the pricing of new phenomena, which we should somehow indicate. But it is rather difficult to determine what exactly is old and what exactly is new. And the other questions immediately arise. Okay, it's old and new, but for whom? And new, is it necessarily something bright, useful in a long run? For instance, is remote work new or old? The phenomenon itself was rather common for a non-pandemic period, but I think, and I believe that here we can agree with Franco, that for the first time this year, many of us mastered services like Zoom or Miro, it's collaborative whiteboards, corporate messengers like Slack, and I'm not sure that this situation is seen as the new normal. Rather, it's like a pause in normal life and emergency situations when the old norms are no longer valid. So we want to look at the proofs here, and I would quote something. This is news from the 10th of November this year. So, quote, Pfizer's announcements of the success of the phase 3 clinical trial of the coronavirus vaccine has caused a stir in stock markets. The shares of the company, for which the release of the vaccine gives hope for a speedy recovery of their business, grew actively. These were air carriers, oil giants, some hotel operators. Oh, well, I think predict that. And at the same time, financial quotes of Zoom video communications fell by nearly 17%. And Bloomberg has already written that the chances are high that people will stop using this service after the pandemic, and as many of us, there were also quotes, will return to offline mode of working. Or, for example, is online education new or not? Well, in fact, massive open courses and webinars have been here for a long time, but the massive use of platforms for distance learning is quite an experiment. And opinion polls, including those conducted by Russian social scientists, show that this innovation isn't always viewed positively. For instance, in mid-April, a team led by Dmitry Rogozin conducted a survey of nearly, if I'm not mistaken, 30,000 Russian university lecturers who spoke about the opportunities and challenges of online education in the pandemic. And as Rogozin himself wrote in some report, on average, the respondent wrote 12 words for his/her views on threats and 10 words for his or her words for opportunities. And the second wave of this survey, conducted in mid-summer, showed that nearly 70% of responders rather or completely disagree that distance learning is convenient and comfortable for students. A little less, 67% of respondents admit that it is rather inconvenient and uncomfortable for them to take exams. And a little more, less 66% of responders believe that the situation caused by coronavirus infection will lead to a degradation and quality of higher education in Russia within a year. This means that even in universities, which I believe actually are better, often better prepared for online communications in comparison with secondary schools. There is lack of exception of online communication and relevant remote infrastructures as the kind of new normal. And the last point, observing online communication during work of remote teams and in education is part of my daily routine, as I'm myself a lecturer and a manager of cultural programs and projects whose teams are running on remote management rights and remote management rules. But as an active user of social media, I cannot ignore the processes taking place there. And in short, it seems to me that we are now witnessing the radical polarization of opinions and weaponizing of the agenda. And it is somewhat new, I believe. I would like to share just one example to cut story short. Since about 2 2017, the phenomenon of cancel culture has been widely discussed in English language media, not only in American media, but all over the world. And after analyzing the data from, for example, New York Times and some governmental sites, one can build the following timeline. So in 2017, writer Shanita Hubbard tweets, "Let's talk cancel culture," with regard to controversy of one of the Olympic gymnasts that remarks about sexual assault. The term was widely used in the quotes and began to pop up on Twitter. Next year, 2018, one of the attorneys writes an essay called "Why Cancel Culture Needs to Be Cancelled." And a few weeks later, another author publishes an essay that is called "Everyone is Cancelled" in the New York Times, noting that rapper Kanye West used the word cancelled 7 times in one of his most read interviews, as the singer was worrying that he would be, and then quote, "cancelled because I didn't cancel Trump," unquote. And in 1819, Google Trends data shows that searches for data culture begin to rise, and the relevant narratives and relevant publications appear in Wired magazine and Time and so on and so on. And finally, well, here and now, 2020, people upset with J.K. Rowling's comments about gender identity and call for her cancellation. And I believe former President of the United States, Donald Trump, compares cancel culture to totalitarian. So I'm sorry. He says, shortly, that cancel culture is a political weapon that demands a total oppression and submission from everyone who disagrees. So when I start looking for usage of this words combination, I found that some media, which doesn't consider cancel culture as a legitimate mechanism for describing or expressive collective displeasure, often writes something like this. And this is with the quote also. "Even free speech, one of America's most cherished values, is controversial within the angry borders of cancel culture, which seeks to censor and punish people whose actions and words have offended others. Canceling someone means to stop giving them attention or money because of something they said or did. Effectively, it's a crowdsourced punishment, and it has grown more prevalent this year as social media use accelerated during the pandemic," unquote. And well, it's not surprise for Russian-speaking, I believe, speakers and experts that in recent months, this phenomenon of cancel culture has also been actively discussed in Russian sectors of Facebook or Twitter. And in July, one media project that is called Kimki Babaduk, it is often described as a feminist media about cinema, published a translated article about current discourse on canceling. And they describe this discourse as nothing more than a moral panic. The original lines that they translated were something like this. "The American left, we are told, is imposing a set of restrictions on which views can be expressed in public. Institutions at every level are supposedly gripped by fears of social media mobs and dire professional consequences if their members express so much as a single statement of wrong thing. This is false. More broadly, the controversy of a cancel culture is a straightforward moral panic. While there are indeed real cases of ordinary Americans harassed into unemployment, this rare, isolated phenomenon is being blown up far beyond its importance. The panic of a cancel culture is, at its core, a reactionary backlash. Conservative elites, threatened by changing social norms and accelerating generational handover, are attempting to amplify their feelings into a national crisis." So it's hard words, and it is clear that it's not the original text of the Russian authors from the Russian media, but by bringing these lines in, I believe those authors solidarize with that lines and that words. And this solidarity is built on a clear not recognition of opponents as the subjects of dialogue. And to finish this long speech, I would like to say that these examples tell me something. I see that, of course, we are all living in a huge crisis situation where the need of taking care of each other is highly recommended. And there are public online discussions concerning sensitive topics, and that's great. But sometimes they don't occur in a sensitive mode. Instead of developing the D&I agenda, the agenda about diversity, equality, and inclusion, agenda that can be carefully implemented in the norms of intersectionality and so on and so forth, we see the polarization of the position. We see and we witness the zero tolerance for everything that is labeled as other. And I'm not, social psychologist to make judgments about why the sense of belonging is realized and performed here in this way during these difficult times. And I honestly don't understand who can benefit from unfolding of such a communication situation. But for now, as something like finalizing remark, the more I see the current crisis, not just a combination of, I don't know, biological, political, and economic difficult times and difficult realities, but as a test of the strength of many humanistic values. And so far, I can see that these values are respected, well, respected as slogans, but not as the basis of action, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oksana. And I suppose we already have several points for discussion, because there are several points that might contribute to, I don't know what it will be, a dialogue, but at least will be, well, let's say the contribution of different positions and trying to understand and translate each other also. But I'm sure that the discussion will start much more, it will become much richer and deeper after our third participant, Egor Rogalev, please. Egor, will you first start with some words, or you will show the video?
I think I will start with some explanation. And first of all, I would like to say hello to everyone, to all the participants and organizers, and to those who will watch or listen to it in Zoom or in recording. And I would like to thank Andrey Shental for this beautiful idea of Salon of Rejected Categories, which I like very much. And also for Moscow International Biennale of Young Art for making this possible. And yes, since I'm here, first of all, as an artist, but now I also have some curatorial duties by doing a program for a new artistic initiative in St. Petersburg called Assembly. But I think that one of the main reasons to invite me here was my artistic practice that somehow deals with the communication in its unusual and awkward sense. I would like to start with speaking about two recent works. And I think some of the points that I will make will resonate with what we have already heard from before Berardi, but maybe not all of them. One of these works is an installation that I made for VII Sidur Museum in collaboration with media artist, poet, linguist, and researcher Evgenia Suslova. And the other one is performance that I made that I've done on my own several times in various locations, but which first of all was produced for the inclusive project Art of Living by National Center for Contemporary Art. And speaking of the first work, I think that it's really important to explain the context of the museum where it was presented, which before used to be a studio of Vadim Sidur himself, a Soviet modernist sculptor, graphic artist, and poet. And a lot of works of Vadim Sidur deal with the trauma of the Second World War, which is also important to mention in the context of our discussion. But for me, Vadim Sidur's museum is very interesting for its connection for various Soviet humanitarian approaches to the rehabilitation of deaf-blind people, which were developed in USSR since the pre-war times. And the fullest expression of these methods was found in the work of Zagorsky School for Deaf-Blind Children, which became widely known as Zagorsky Experiment, a pedagogical program of the 70s, which was meant to prove that the lack of vision, hearing is not an obstacle to learning and formation of personality and successful socialization of a person. And it's also interesting that the experiment itself was somehow conceptualized by the famous representative of the Soviet Marxist philosophical tradition, Evald Ilyenkov, who was also taking part in the program. And in late 80s, the participants of the experiment, both the educators and the children, have visited the Vadim Sidur studio, where they have interacted with his sculptures in the tactile manner. And the work, okay, maybe I will start the slideshow to make it clear. Oh. Okay. Yeah, and this work called Icons is an installation. I don't think it works with all the pictures. Is an installation which was located in 2 rooms on the 2nd floor of the museum, in 2 rooms connected by the sound, which appeared in 1 room while the plasticine object was touched, and this reflected in the sound which appeared in the 2nd room. And this work was influenced by the story, which was important for a Zagorsky experiment as, let's say, a conceptual or philosophical example. It's a story of deaf-blind girl, Yulia Vinogradova, who was walking along the ravine and made its plasticine model after getting back to her place after this walk. And her physical action has turned into an image and an imprint. And philosopher Evald Ilyenkov called such cognitive route a movement along a contour of think, considering body as a thinking entity. I think this work raises a question of how elementary actions like impulses, touches can result in signs that establish the basis for new communication systems, and how the subject gains access to him or herself through them. And the data of this experiment is aligns with the ideas of some neurobiologists that insist that action is cognition. I can mention, first of all, Chilean Marxist scientists Francisco Varela and Umberto Maturana, but also at some point Vygotsky, Ilyenkov, and Bernstein, who whose attempts to describe the essence of the cognition were based on the same or very similar propositions. And today we live in the biometric dimension, and fingerprints became a kind of science of the body. But if you break down the fingerprint into its features, it will turn into arcs, loops, and branches, and which somehow resemble the sign systems. So the question is, are the signs of the surface able to inform us about something deep, which can be developed by changing the modes of attention and feeling? Okay. So now I stop the screen demonstration. And what is important in this work for me in the context of our panel? You can see that Yulia Vinogradova was dealing with something that exceeded her experience. Ravine is not something that you can observe, that touch, at least on a human scale. But what is really important is that she dealt with it in an artistic way by creating an image, a sculpture, which of course communicates something, but first of all, maybe to Yulia herself, not to someone else. And I think what she actually has communicated with this gesture is her experience. That later someone can recreate or understand by hearing this story or seeing this sculpture, which has actually got lost. So one of the objects in our installation is meant to be a monument, a kind of the monument to this experience. And here I want to make a conclusion that might be important. We can see or we can consider an ability or refusal to communicate in a traditional or conventional way, because I believe that this refusal or inability, it is always a sign of something, and it also communicates something. But we can see it as a situation where lived experience is unable to fit into existing languages. And also it's important that very often a refusal to communicate is connected to post-traumatic stress disorder, and in these cases it is called muteness or mutism. But I would like to think that this muteness has a potential for the emergence of the new languages and new means of communication, which itself is actually what always happens in artistic practice. Art itself, at least for me, is an experimental ground for trying and testing new languages and ways of expression and communication, which also proposes a constant transformation and reconfiguration of the subjectivity. So I also want to propose that maybe all these situations, these communication breaks that we speak about, they can exemplify, they can show the trauma by the modernity itself, with its communication systems that exceed our abilities of conceptualization or visualization, and which the pandemic situation, when everything went online, has shown very clear, as Franco Berardi has already mentioned. I think that these breaks and interruption always bring some effect, as it was explained by Russian philosopher Elena Petrovskaya, I think deriving from Spinoza. Effect is something that increases the ability of the bodies to act. So maybe it would be useful and interesting to think how these breaks and interruptions in communication system could be used as means for collective mobilization when communication itself is not able to do that. And still art may be a good area to experiment with this. So now I want to move to the other work, a performance called Organ of Memory that tries to offer new ways of understanding of the events associated with the massive political repressions of 1937-38, which directly affected people with sensory impairments. When in fabricated case of the so-called Leningrad deaf-mute affair, 55 people with no hearing were detained for creating a terrorist organization. And most of them were sent to Gulag or executed later. And it's interesting that the arrest itself occurred during the rehearsal of the play, how Steel was tempered by Ostrovsky in sign language. And this play was assigned to the 20th anniversary of the October Revolution. But I think there is a lot to tell about these connections of the Ostrovsky novel and this play to the issue of disability, but I don't think it belongs to this panel. So I just will maybe explain the performance, which was based on the reading of this novel in Russian Sign Language in the presence of the theremin sensors. And the sensors responded with sound signals to the movements of the hands of the performance. And the sound was processed to be available as vibrations, not only for the ears, but also for the bodies itself. So, and maybe this work is an attempt to create an effect for collective mobilization from this break in communication, because it has some kind of inversion of the exclusivity and inclusivity in it, because for the people who know science language, the semantics of the novel were available, but for those who do not know it, it was just a sound effect or the movements of the bodies and the facial expressions, things like this. So I think we can watch a small trailer of the documentation, and maybe with this I will stop by now. And thanks to everyone, and we can continue. Okay, thanks. I hope it was not too long. Yeah, and yeah, I think we. I don't know if any of us can use sign language, but I think we were in this position where we can only experience the effect of the sound, of the movements of the bodies and facial expressions and so on. And I would like to believe that this has something to do with abilities of our bodies to act. Okay.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much, Egor. I suppose that it was important to participate in also in being spectators of the documentation. And while watching it myself, I thought, probably documentation is not something completely new, but our ability just to become a bit more involved into what you have done is, well, also new ability. And this is something about what Oksana had told. Of course, we can argue whether it is new or not, or whether it is some kind of communication we need to overcome and to invent something further, probably not new, but different. However, I would just stress that during the very process of our communication, the effects you're talking about is also, occurring with us. And what is important as well is that if you are watching this conversation in Zoom or in Vkontakte, I quite encourage you to write and to ask questions, and we will, transfer them to the dialogue. That is also something strange about communication. However, please do not hesitate and write your questions, your comments, and so on, and they will, via plenty of wires and pillars and so on, become a part of our conversation as well. So what we're going on here, because there are really several points that I suppose you already have those one who have told something you might want to reflect on. And I thought that well, we have really several statements about what is the reconfiguration of subjectivity due to latest transformation, or let's say something going on take place. And two of you have mentioned trauma, so probably we also need to discuss more precisely what do we mean here, and well, whether these meanings of the word are different or similar. And I have been looking for the ideas and solutions, you suppose, and we have really three of them or even more, because your points here are very different. As far as I understood, Oksana, it's okay with words. We really do have new words, new situation, new words, and they are more or less sufficient. However, there is no dialogue. That's a bit of paradox, but what are two other ideas? They are not about words at all. They're about body and ability in a wider sense. So what Franco said, that with this here have this phobic attention to the body of other, and that's can. I'm now trying to be cautious with words, so I can just say connected with the conjunction and communication here. But in some sense, this phobic attention to the body of others is a problem, is a new issue we need to deal with in the means of conjunction and connection that are not equal. And also what Egor told and performed was about the new, and here I also wonder whether it is new or just different communication system that comes into being and reassembles not only the our abilities to communicate, our words, our bodies, but also the hierarchy of what is ability itself, and ability to participate, the ability to communicate. So, but these are three different directions from my point of view. They are more or less dealing with similar symptoms, but these are three ways. And I wonder here whether can we combine them, or whether one of those is something you really see that no, it's not about this. Like this neologisms, these words are like not what we need, or vice versa, that this manifesto also to reimagine the eros and to transform the bodies, or transform the ability and hierarchy is something that you don't feel might work together with your approach here. So by probably contrasting your points, of course, because I understand that they're deeper, I nevertheless encourage you here to probably re-explain something after it met the different position, or just to say where you have some other nuances or ideas. So please, Franco, Oksana, Egor, who wants to go on?
Well, I say that what's happening during the year 2020 is not absolutely new. On the contrary, it's sort of a precipitation of acceleration of a process that was already underway. So in order to answer your question, I would say we have not only to look at what is happening now, to look at the obvious fact that I cannot be in Moscow with you, and that means that our communication is devoid of a sort of physical, proxemic confirmation of our being here. This is not new. This has already been happening in the last decades. And now we are living an apocalypse in the etymological sense of the word. What is an apocalypse? The etymology of apocalypse means, refers to a revelation. The apocalypse is disclosing something which was already there and all of a sudden is totally manifest. What is manifest now? I would say that we are living the evidence of communication without body. Body is not only, let's say, an object of our communication. It's also a marker. The beautiful performance that Egor had the kindness of showing us is, in my opinion, is exactly about this. The complex relation between the body, the bodily articulation of signs, the semantic level of our interpretation of that, and the pragmatic, I would say, erotic interpretation of signs. When we communicate, we are not only exchanging meaning, we are most of all exchanging our feeling about that meaning. This is why human communication is, in the good sense of the word, ambiguous, because any sign is interpretable at different levels in relation with the presence of the body who is talking, and obviously in relation with the context in which the communication unfolds. Problem is that all of a sudden, the physicality of the body, the presence in space, what we can call the proxemic, and the smell of bodies meeting in the same space is lost. The effect of this is a desperate attempt to reduce ambiguity. When we communicate in the same physical space, ambiguity is enriching communication. When we are in a connective relation, ambiguity is a danger. Connection is not for ambiguity. Connection is based on syntactic format of the exchange. The syntactic order of the digital communication is excluding, refusing, rejecting the possibility of ambiguousness and of irony, for instance, and of poetical implications of our talk, and so on and so forth. That is affecting, of course, also our present relation. I'm talking to Paulina, Paulina is talking to me, but our communication is deprived of some levels. I must add that I am almost totally deaf, so I try desperately to understand that when I look at the lips, because reading lips is helping my understanding. You see, I am not far from the problematic of the performance of Egor, but when I am in the same space, I understand something about you that I cannot understand in this distance. But forget about our discussion, because we are people who share so many intellectual, aesthetic, philosophical, political implications that our communication is very much helped by this intellectual context. Think about daily life. Think about people, young people, children who cannot go to school. In Italy, you know that in the last 6 months, children cannot go to school, and the school is replaced by Zoom, by digital distance communication. What is changing in the perception, in the bodily perception, but also in the intellectual elaboration of children who are obliged to replace school, to replace the physical space of school with a screen. And that is my point, that something is happening, and I define it a trauma. Trauma is a abrupt transformation that can be instantaneous or sometimes long-lasting. This is a long-lasting, slow-motion trauma, which is changing something in our pragmatic relation to the other. And well, this is what I mean. I said that we are facing problems that do not belong to the political sphere. The political will care nothing about that. It is about psychoanalysis in a sense or another, because it's the unconscious which is affected in this transformation, and it is for artists because it's the aesthetic, the perceptual environment that we are talking about.
Thank you very much. And probably I would ask Egor here, because what you have mentioned is dealing with trauma, but I wonder whether you find, Egor, whether you find the similarities of what Franco is talking about and what you also aim to deliver us, the idea of reassemblage of communication without the words, or reassemble of the phobic attention to the body, of this, absence of the body, or more probably transformation of the body. So what is the interrelation between this idea of delivering meaning by a body and the communication? I mean, if there's a difference, if there is not only about meaning but about something more, and what is the role of the body from your point of view here, Egor, when corresponding with what Franco had said?
Is it for me? Yeah.
Primarily for Egor, but if you want also to answer, and then it would be great.
No. Just a remark. You see, in this kind of situation, I am looking for eye contact, but I can't find it. Eye contact is abolished in the digital world, in the Zoom conference. So, well, please, Egor.
Yeah, I actually don't have that much to add to what Bifo has already told us, but I have, in connection to this idea of trauma, I remember the point that artist Alexander Sukharev has made once. I'll try to tell it right now. And she said that beauty is somehow an emergent quality of overcoming of trauma, of overcoming of the trauma. So I think it also resonates with the idea that art is this ground for reacting to the situations and events that overcome or exceed abilities of our senses or languages or other systems of communication. But as for the body is always somehow experiencing these situations and in some way or the other reacting to them. But I think also it's not a matter of the quantity, but because our digitalized modernity is based on the constant exchange of the information. But if we agree at this point that every information for us as organisms, as bodies, as the human beings is always encolored by emotion, by some emotion, then we see that sometimes this constant exchange of information lacks this point, because it's not only humans speaking, it's also machines taking part in this information exchange, and neural networks, bots. So it creates this constant exchange. It creates the noise that sometimes is needed to be interrupted. I can get back to this idea that somehow art is one of the ways of dealing with it. But it's really a difficult task, of course, because we have to deal with these complex systems that it's really hard, that are really hard to visualize and so on.
Thank you very much. And I'm now thinking about what does the noise mean here, and also what do we mean here, as far as you have mentioned in this communication, there are not only humans, but the machines and so on, that we cannot, I don't want to oppose one another here, just question what is it here, and also question what does it mean, the difference between experiencing, because you have said that all the borders are experiencing something, and the communication and the reflection. And Oksana, probably you will go on here on your ideas about, also I see you nodding when we spoke about trauma, probably twice. So it is a third time, probably it's a sign, you know.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, I'm like Jon Snow, know nothing about psychological trauma. And maybe just today, we all leave this mental state. But I do know a few things about collective trauma. And maybe this is also the relevant term for our talk, for our dialogue, because we're all having this collective experience of pain, losses, I don't know, insecurity. And this collective experience changes the whole perception of life, joy, so the whole perception of ontologically important things. And when I think about certain circumstances, nowadays circumstances, in terms of collective trauma, I feel some gaps and lacks, and I feel, and maybe it is my mistake, that it doesn't suit well the situation. So when we talk about collective or, I don't know, cultural trauma, we always find that there should be the lack of language. So the mutism, as Egor told. But when we are looking through the newspapers, the media, the informational flows around us and within us, we see that there is a huge amount of witnesses that report instantly about their experiences and about health issues, about economic issues, about political issues, and whether we're online or offline, we can trace all these traumatic experiences and traumatic narratives. And then the question arises if there's actually the lack of language. And then I'm trying to think what the researchers who are working within the field of trauma studies would say in this case. And I can tell that, for example, Jeffrey Alexander, one of the social researchers who's currently working on the cases of traumatic events, he used to say that the trauma has the performative power of constructed events. So when you see something like huge catastrophic hole that forms traumatic experience within people's minds, feelings, and so on and so forth, you should think over this idea of performative power of constructed events. And I personally think that At that moment, I merely have courage to tell where the mode of construction starts if we talk about pandemic context. Because it's, you can be perceived as someone who is into, conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. And that is why I'm so, not nervous, but I'm so unstable about using the verb or the noun trauma here. And besides, I don't like the biological discourse interfering with the humanitarian issues. So I don't like the word trauma itself. And maybe it's because I worked with this for a long time, and I don't find it quite useful from the epistemological point of view. But the second thing here is something like that. I don't want to be perceived here as the devil advocates. So I do understand that online communication isn't a safe and desired situation. So in any case, when I talk about online communication and via online instruments, I don't feel safe. In general, I suppose that safety is not the appropriate word in this current systematic crisis. And I can even, illustrate this idea with several points, as I like points, So I know that online communication sometimes is perceived as fake, as something not authentic enough. And of course, I know that opinions are often expressed online without due responsibility. So for instance, I'm always questioning myself if I can trust these opinions, if people in offline mode would say the same things with the same, intonations. And I don't feel safe because I can never be sure that I will be seen and will be felt in that current position that I want to show. And I, of course, always question myself if I can see and feel the nuances in remote communication. Of course, I don't believe in safety here because I know that current communication situation is technocentric. And we all depend on devices, we all depend, and we're here means, for example, all of us at the moment, and we're all at the moment are depending on the quality of the signal, on the presence or absence of technical interference. And for example, I can feel myself personally as a subject of communication, but I know that there are many digital agents, platforms, developers, AI biases, and so on. And I can't a priori trust someone or something in this environment. And I don't feel safe because I believe personally, of course, I believe that online can be, and maybe it's a myth, but nevertheless, that it can be about horizontal partnership, about reducing distance, and at the same time about maintaining subordination. But do others think so? And should I let others into my personal space, including those I wouldn't like and whose opinion I wouldn't like? So of course, I can feel safe and I can say and promote online communication as a space of safe interactions. But when I think about this all over again, one time and another, I'm asking myself, and what is the alternative? So is neologism is alternative? What can I do to bring or build alternative? And here I'm facing that mutism. Maybe here I'm facing my individual trauma, but I believe that there are much more questions that answers from me at that point.
Thank you very much, and special thanks probably for this opposition of the words that quickly appear in media and might quickly appear in dictionaries as well, and inability to because it brings us another understanding of ability from my point of view that is not the similar and the same as Franco and Egor have mentioned, because Well, we started, and Andrey started with a question of status of communication, the political probably meaning of, you know, being together, not only being together, but communication as something we must do in order to be, you know, normal. But we didn't speak about it. We spoke about our ability to do it, not about the norms, but what the possibilities and impossibilities. And I suppose it's, you know, quite important way of way our conversation went, because, oh, you know, we are speaking here, and it seems to be not convenient sometimes. We lack eye contact. We do not feel safe whenever we appreciate safety or not. We experience, you know, technological problems. But it's normal, and it's not, I mean, no one of us is out of frame here. It's not a risky communication in this means, and probably it's even difficult to problematize the power and the problem of communication being, you know, in such a comfortable, in some way, condition. I mean, with all the, when we take in brackets all this question about the abilities. But nevertheless, I remind that if you are not in such a comfortable position, if you're just watching us, please send us the questions, and I will be the one who reads them and brings you to this, your comments and questions here, as we have already some, and we are going to finish in about 20 minutes, I suppose. So I'm afraid we don't have so much time. So just if you are thinking about it, I encourage you to send us something. And the question we have is from Philip, and it is about our whether, or several questions. So I will read you them, and probably each of you can choose the question you prefer, or not choose. I mean, if you don't believe in choice like me. So has our new mode of pandemic communication changed our perception of authentic conversation?
Please, Paulina, slow.
Okay.
Otherwise,
sorry.
I don't.
Sorry. So the first question is: has our new mode of pandemic communication changed our perception of authentic conversation? Then the second is: previously we viewed internet and various other mediums as something in between our live connection with other. Now, have we finally naturalized these mediums as parts of our emotional bodies? And finally, does world crisis lowered threshold of social awkwardness, as we could just turn our screens off and leave awkward situation solving the problem? So please, so the first one is about authentic conversation. The second, yeah, thank you for writing as well. The second, yeah, about internet, whether it is naturalized, and it's also about nature probably, as part of our emotional body. And finally, I hope I understand it right, that we can just turn off the screens and leave awkward situations. So it's an easy way from awkwardness, you know. So is the internet here the easy way also? So please, if you wanted to, if you feel that some of these questions do touch what you were talking about, or probably several of them, then.
Sorry, I sent them also to the chat, so you can see them in English if you would like to read.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrey.
Speaking of authentic conversation, I think now maybe it's quite hard to tell what it actually is, what is authentic from this point. But for sure, I think this type of conversation is very vulnerable. First of all, because of what Oksana has mentioned, it's dependence on the technical means. And today I have experienced a lot of stress with the shutdown of the electricity right before the start of our discussion. And I think I always get much more exhausted from these online events than I get from the real physical events. But I think second reason for it to be vulnerable is because this conversation can very easily get lost in this ocean of events that is happening right now. But maybe this vulnerability makes it somehow, I think it's also an interesting aspect of conversation, of communication, to work with, maybe even artistically.
Thank you. I here do not encourage you to switch between these themes, but rather if some of that, I'm quite interested in the question actually, and why we cannot just turn off. I mean, now, for example, as we might feel uncomfortable. So what is the reason? And we have no pressure from which authorities, from these ones, from the wires, or from what to our bodies to leave it. So whether this invisible pressure or new sensibilization affects us, so we agree, and if we revise, then this revision is more or less about attempt to agree, not to switch off, not to say that we disconnect, right? We discommunicate. What stops us from this radical interruption of communication? What makes the school children, Franco, you have mentioned, go to school, like they participate, they cannot run away. So if we exclude just the things about of course, the political pressure, these things we understand, but nevertheless, probably you have some ideas here. And this is how I try to derive also the third question of Philip.
Well, can I a little interrupt here? I have just very brief, opinion. I think maybe we just don't want or are not ready to turn off the screens because it will be evidence that we use the technology as a means to escape. So we can escape within this technology, but we can escape somewhere outside. But it is at the same time, in all these options, it's about being able to escape. And maybe, I can speak just for myself. Maybe I don't want to be seen as a person, as a subject who runs off the dialogue in every awkward situation. So I just want to take back my subjectivity, even if it means that I should be sitting here in several Zoom conferences and so on and so forth.
Thank you. And this brings us back to the question of subjectivity we started with. And probably it's, there's a full round of conversation here. And what is this dialogue we cannot escape from, or we don't want to escape from, but we, want to reconfigure it, or at least we're talking now about it. So Franco, probably you have some ideas on the subjectivity here you want to share, and then we will finalize our conversation.
Yeah. First, I want to say something about two words that we have been using in the conversation: the word authentic and the word trauma. Authentic communication. Well, I would not use the word authentic. In any case, our communication is never natural, is never authentic in the sense of referring to a sort of naturality. We are, in any case, not only now, but also 500 years ago, we also are determined by the certain kind of technological context, proxemic context, and so on. I mean, the book, the alphabetical communication of the book has changed deeply the forms of social communication, understanding the ideology and the social process too. So it's not a problem of authenticity, of going back to a sort of natural form of communication. No, it's a problem of cartographing and mapping, understanding, analyzing the different dispositions, the different settings of our interaction in relation with the change of the technological framework of communication itself. Second, the word trauma. I see Oksana, as if I understand well, as sort of criticized the use of the word, or at least relativized this term. Well, forget about trauma. Let's speak of mutation. This is what is interesting for me. I understand that the word trauma can seem too much medical, too much invasive in a certain sense. No, the process of subjectivation is continuously reframed by the conditions in which this process of subjectivation happens. I mean political subjectivation, I mean affective subjectivation. Speaking of political subjectivation, thinks to the difference between the industrial worker who live inside a factory in direct relation, physical, bodily relation with his colleague, and the creation of forms of political forms of solidarity that are based on this kind of relation. Think to the precarious cognitive worker who is interacting by a digital, with a digital tool, which is living all his day, all his work day in front of a screen. I mean, the possibilities of social solidarity are, I don't say are erased, I don't say cancelled, I say reframed. And the problem that we are living now is how to reframe our possibility of affection, solidarity, eroticism, irony in an environment which is so thoroughly changing from the proxemic and technical point of view. This is my vision of the problem, my contribution.
Thank you so much. And I just try to go on and think, how might this conversation take place after we reframe it? And after the transformation, the abilities, the words we are talking about today might already, themselves participate in some new transformation, not new again, but in some going on transformation process. I hope we might, I'm sure that everyone wants to participate in it and to experience it. However, what I appreciate now is this 2 hours of collective attempts to understand and imagine it. And this is yet unfinished from my point of view, but it was quite, putting into some new trouble of how to deal with this collective imagination in Zoom. Because how might it change if this conversation went another way, like in chat? I don't know. So thank you very much. It was very interesting to try to communicate with you. And now I ask Andrey to say some final words and gratefully escape then.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to announce for the viewers next conversations, and will take place in 6 days on Monday, and it will be about illness and sickness and its visibility, invisibility, manifestation, and non-manifestation. It will happen also at 7 o'clock Moscow time. So thank you. See you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.